All right, welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. And I am being joined now by my guest, who is Stephen C. Meyer. He is the director of the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute and New York Times bestselling author of Darwin's Doubt. And he has a new book out. He's a philosopher of science, which is something that I think I can say we all would love to know more about, because what is the philosophy of science? So, Stephen, welcome to the program. And you are aware that this is video, right?
Yes, exactly. Good morning. Oh, let me click the video.
Yeah, because we couldn't see you.
There, how's that? Is that
Oh
better?
my gosh, that's so much
Yeah.
better.
Oh, thank you very much.
So can you
Well,
just explain to me philosopher of science?
yeah, absolutely. That's the discipline that looks at the questions that lie at the intersection between science and philosophy. Every scientific subject has certain assumptions that are not strictly empirical, but can that are essentially philosophical in nature. Science in general, for example, assumes that nature is uniform in its basic properties throughout space and time. That's not something that can be proven empirically by looking at the world, but it's something that you assume as you go about examining the world. And then individual subjects in science have underlying philosophical questions or larger philosophical implications. And I've always been interested in questions that lie at the intersection between science and philosophy. That's
Yes.
the reason I went into the field. Yeah.
So before we get into the book, and by the way, the name of the book is The Return of the God Hypothesis, which it's discussing this idea that I guess I'll try to sum it up a little bit, but I'm sure you'll do a better job. But I've noticed that oftentimes scientists, the deeper that they delve into whatever their line of study is, the closer they come to the acknowledgement of God, right?
There's an old quotation from Francis Bacon that goes something like this. I'm not sure I've got it verbatim, but he said that a little philosophy, and by that he meant natural philosophy at the time, which was what they called science, a little philosophy inclineth a man's mind towards atheism, but depth in philosophy turns a man's mind and heart back to his maker. And I think that's, in a sense, part of the story of this book, is that science began in a decidedly Judeo-Christian context. For historians of science actually tell us, for specifically Judeo-Christian reasons, that the early scientists thought that nature was intelligible because they thought that it was the product of a rational mind, or that nature was the product of a rational mind. In fact, the same rational mind who had created us in his image so that we could understand nature. They believed that there was a lawful order in nature. They believed that that order depended on the will of the creator, and therefore we had to go and see how it was actually made. We couldn't just deduce it ourselves without observation. And then during the late 19th century, this theistic foundation for modern science was lost, and a more materialistic framework for doing science came into existence with figures like Darwin and Marx and later Freud. And the book tells the story of three scientific discoveries that are challenging that scientific materialistic perspective that we inherited from the late 19th century. We still have the popular new atheists and scientific atheists out there saying that science and belief in God are at war, but the book argues that they shouldn't be. There are the major discoveries we've had about the origin of the universe and the origin of life point decidedly in a theistic direction.
Have you heard? So this is something new that sort of came across my desk. There is no theory of evolution for the laws of physics.
Well, right. The laws of physics are presupposed in any theory of evolution, and the mathematical regularity of those laws is something that has inspired deep reflection from the very beginning of the scientific revolution. In fact, figures like Kepler and Newton thought that our ability to describe the regularities of nature, the regular concourse of nature with mathematics, was a manifestation of the divine mind at work in sustaining the universe in an orderly way. And the Principia, Newton's great masterpiece, was about the principles of mathematics that were evident in nature, and he believed that exposing them, revealing them in his work, brought glory to God. So, the what we call the laws of nature are, in fact, the term laws of nature or law of nature is a theological metaphor. It's a metaphor of theological origin that implies that there are laws in nature because there is a divine lawgiver who sustains and regulates the orderly concourse of nature.
But of course, the atheist would argue, but that's silly because there are laws anyway, and they don't need a creator. They existed before we even had evolution, and so they supported evolution in order to get us where we are today.
Well, perhaps, but this goes back to a very ancient debate between Leibniz and Newton. Leibniz was a great German philosopher.
Mhm.
When Newton put forward the universal law of gravity, Leibniz was very opposed to Newton's work because there was something mysterious about the law of gravity, and that is that it described what's called action at a distance. Last night I was looking at the moon, and all those miles away, there's this light in the sky, and we now know that the moon's movements affect the tides on Earth. The gravitational attraction between these two bodies at a distance is transmitted through empty space. So that the moon isn't pushing the Earth, but it's causing a movement of the water on the Earth. And so Leibniz thought that Newton's concept of gravity that implied that even though massive bodies weren't touching each other, even though there was no pushing and pulling, there was a force being transmitted. It's quite mysterious how that force could be transmitted through a distance. And Newton described this with a mathematical equation, but Leibniz pressed him to say what he thought was causing gravity. And Newton, through an intermediary, said that he didn't know, but privately writing to a man named Bishop Bentley, he said, well, what we call the law of gravity is effectively the result of the action of God constantly holding the universe together in an orderly way that we can describe with mathematics. So what we call the laws of nature are descriptions of what always happens. At the fundamental level, we know not why, at least from a materialistic standpoint. So I think there's something very, very mysterious about why nature has these beautiful regularities. And one explanation that has seemed very satisfying to many scientists is that actually the uniformity and the regularity of those laws and their universal application throughout nature suggests that there may be a great mind behind them. Einstein was very sympathetic to that view, though he wasn't a traditional theist.
Right. I've heard that. They still don't understand gravity, and
No.
yet they teach children in school that it exists, and that basic, and the offset is we know all about it. That's why there's no God. Like because of, okay, so you understand, I come at everything from an educational point of view because I think everything begins and ends with education, or at least begins with education, right? Because education colors the way that you view what you learn even. And so, growing up in school, I learned that gravity existed, that we had the gravitational constant, that it was this force. And then it was this enormous discovery to me, like a shock, to find out that the scientists actually don't have an explanation for gravity. They just know that it's there.
Right. We describe it mathematically, but explaining what causes it is as mysterious now as in Newton's time. I used to drop my wallet in class when I was teaching and ask students, okay, well, so what causes the wallet to fall? And they
The
would say,
earth
well,
wants your money.
yeah, exactly. Everybody wants your money.
It's global warming.
Yeah, something like that. It's a form of taxation, I guess. So I dropped the wallet, and the students would say, and I say, what causes what causes the wallet to fall? They say gravity, and I'd say, well, but what is gravity? And they'd say, well, with a little prompting sometimes, well, it's the tendency for things to fall, or it's the tendency for unsupported bodies to fall, but anyway, gravity gets defined. The attempt to tell what causes gravity is just renaming the effect
Right.
as its own cause.
Right.
And this is what bothered Leibniz about Newton's theory. And Newton said, well, hypothesis non fingo in the Latin, meaning I don't feign to know the cause, but I can describe what it does mathematically with great precision. Now, there's a new, Einstein developed a different theory of gravity in the 19 teens called general relativity. And his idea was that massive bodies are curving space, and that the curvature of space uh, uh, creates preferred lines of trajectory for other massive bodies moving past massive bodies. But space is empty. It's not a physical thing that pushes or pulls. So it's equally mysterious on Einstein's theory. Now we have gravitons, which are supposedly particles that are responsible for gravity, but they're massless, and they're not pullers, they're pushers. Or they're not pushers, they're pullers. They attract somehow. And so a massless particle that attracts things is also pretty mysterious as to a cause of gravity. So we haven't really, I had a supervisor in Cambridge who said, the mystery that was exposed in this discussion between Leibniz and Newton hasn't been solved in 300 years. The four fundamental laws of physics are forces that we can describe mathematically, but we don't ultimately know what causes them.
Right.
Certainly not from a materialistic standpoint.
But I mean, that's a really profound admission that that I feel like just general society misses out on. My daughter just did a big.
By the way, now we're doing the philosophy of science. So,
right.
Yeah, in this conversation. Yeah.
So my daughter just did a big research paper on black holes. And she said, Mom, space is basically like fabric, and the black holes warp the fabric. And, it's very difficult for us to even describe what it is. And it's a theory in a sense, because they have found a black hole, but it was theoretical for a long time. In fact, I believe Einstein was one of the first, if not the first person to hypothesize about black holes and their effects. And, we've got some big problems because we believe that matter is neither created nor destroyed, but then it's destroyed in a black hole. But then the theory is that it's actually destroyed and recreated on the other side of the black hole, which opens up a whole conversation about time.
There's some deep mysteries in science. The black hole physics figures into the story that I tell in the book.
I wondered.
Because Hawking was working on black holes, Stephen Hawking, in the 1960s when he was doing his PhD thesis, soon after he'd been diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And he knew that the observational astronomers had established in the 1920s that the universe was expanding. The light coming from distant galaxies is moving away from us, and every distant is being stretched out as the galaxies are moving away from us in every quadrant of the night sky. That suggested an expanding universe. If you wind the time clock backwards, then that implies that the universe would have had to begin that expansion at some finite time in the past, and we now call that the Big Bang. Hawking was reflecting on all that. He knew that according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, which, by the way, has been very well confirmed by many observations, that massive bodies curve space. So if the galactic material is moving outward in the forward direction of time, as you wind the clock backwards, it gets closer and closer and closer together, and eventually causing space to get more and more and more tightly curved, eventually reaching a limiting case where the curvature of space goes to an infinite, corresponding to zero spatial volume, before which you cannot extend your reasoning any further, and in which you have no place to put anything. I used to ask my students, how much stuff can you put in zero space?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. So you get everything coming out of nothing in an instant of time, and time and space begin at that point. This marks the beginning of the universe, the creation event, if you will.
Sure. And otherwise known as the Big Bang to some people.
Or the physicists refer to it as the cosmological singularity, where the laws of physics break down and from which everything began. Now,
here's the thing. If the laws of physics can break down, then they must have a beginning also.
Exactly.
That's a big problem.
That's a big problem. Before the singularity, you can't invoke the laws of physics to explain the origin of the universe, because there is no physics yet for the laws to describe.
Right.
And nor can you provide a materialistic explanation because there's no matter or energy or space and time to do the causing. So you need to explain the origin of the universe, you need a cause which is separate from the universe, as all causes are separate from their effects. And you need a cause which is not subject to our time, not within space, and not material. And that sounded to an awful lot of physicists like God. In fact, if you posit God as an explanation for the origin of the universe, you can provide an explanation for it. But materialism as a worldview or as a concept is unable to provide such an explanation because, again, there's no matter prior to the origin of matter that could have caused the universe to come into existence.
In a
So,
sense, the materialists back themselves into a singularity,
well, the
for which there
universe,
is no way out.
yeah, the universe backed itself into a singularity, or the
Exactly.
evidence suggests that we can back up to a singularity. Now, there have been attempts to circumvent this problem. In fact, Hawking himself
Okay.
spent
So,
many years of his life trying to do that, to come up
right,
with a new model of
right,
cosmology that would do that. But I show in the
right,
book that even his new model has hidden theistic implications that,
right.
yeah.
And so, once again, I just want to get this out there. The name of the book is The Return of the God Hypothesis. We're going to take a quick break, but I will be, I'm going to keep you around for another segment, if you don't mind, because I want to talk about theistic evolution, if you have any comments on that, and the fact that evolution is unequal. And I'll
Yes.
get to that right after the break. So just stay with me for just a minute. And for those of you listening on radio, the rest of this interview will be available at sorbos.locals.com. So you can join me there. All right. Hi, I'm Sam Sorbo, and this is the Sam Sorbo Show. In case you didn't know, I've gone to a new format, and so I post small portions of my weekly radio show on video at YouTube every other day. So thanks for joining me here. If you want to hear more of the show, just tune back in 2 days, or go back in the archives and take a look at what else I've done in the past. Thanks so much for joining me. Please share the word. Let's keep truth free.